Baptisia. The common name is false indigo. And they're in the pea family, so the flowers look like pea flowers. They're natives, at least the blue and the yellow are native. The purple is a cultivar. They like a nice, well-drained, sunny area. They're very long-lived, so they can get pretty large in diameter. And they have a big taproot, so once you put them in, they'd be difficult to move. This is another perennial in the pea family. It's Lespedisa, called bush clover, and it will get pretty large. This one's about 7 feet tall. Nice purple flowers in the fall. The bees like it. And again, pretty long-lived, fairly easy to maintain. And you just cut it back in the fall, and then it just dies back completely. This is another native, American beautyberry, and it gets loaded with these purple berries in the fall, all up and down the stems. And in the winter, you can trim it back to about a foot, and it'll grow quite large in one season. And the wildlife do eat the berries, although they're not really the first choice. Here's Blatilla, Chinese ground orchid. It flowers in the spring, really nice purple stalks, and then the leaves stay upright and really nice looking the rest of the year. And it'll spread slowly underground by its roots. It likes it well drained, but not too fussy, so it does well in a lot of locations. These are the two milkweeds we grow for the monarchs. The left one is butterfly weed, the right one's swamp milkweed. Now there's common milkweed, and that one's actually great for the monarchs, but it's a real thug, and it'll spread all over the place by its underground roots. So I tried it once, and then it took 3 years to get rid of it. So unless you have a lot of room and don't mind it spreading, you probably don't want to use it in your garden. This is Rattlesnake Master. It's a native, and it looks a bit like a yucca, and it likes the same kind of conditions. And it gets these tall flower stalks. Those flowers are little small bristly flowers. They don't open much more than that. They're only about 3/4 of an inch in diameter. But you can see that the butterflies do go for them. This is an example of what can happen when really tiny eryphrid mites attack a flower bud. This is a purple coneflower, and it came out double-sided. And it's only for this season. It was only the one flower on the plant. Next year, the plant's totally normal. These are some of the tropical plants that we grow on the deck. On the left are canna lilies, and then in the center is a red mandevilla, and the right is a yellow alamanda. Now, in the winter, they have to come inside, and if you had a greenhouse, you could probably keep the mandevilla and the alamanda growing as is. But what I do is cut these back almost all the way and then store them in the basement near a window. And they're semi-dormant. They might grow a little bit, but the idea is just to keep them through the winter. And the canna stays out until first frost, cut everything completely back, and then I move the tubers into a pot into the soil and keep it very slightly moist, again in the basement. Night blooming cereus. This is a desert plant. It's actually pollinated by bats, and those flowers are really, really fragrant, and they're about 5 inches in diameter, but they only stay open for one night. Each flower opens at dusk, then by midnight it's fully open, and then the next morning it's just flopped over and that's it. It's actually a pretty easy plant to grow. It doesn't need too much care. It doesn't like real bright light. To propagate it, you just cut off one of those stems and put it in the soil, and it'll root eventually and just start growing. These are orchid cactus. They look like Christmas cactus, and they're related. They're much larger. The flowers are about 3 to 5 inches in diameter, and they flower in summer instead of in the winter months. But you treat them just about the same way as you would a Christmas cactus. They like being outside in a shady area, and then in the winter we just bring them inside. And finally, here's just some of the wildlife that comes into the yard. Across the top, there's a monarch caterpillar that's munching on a leaf. Then a ruby-throated hummingbird is sitting there on its feeder, and there's a dragonfly on an orchid root. Then there's a bluebird at the feeder, They come around a lot in the winter because they're eating seed instead of insects. Then I was lucky enough to get the pileated woodpecker when it was on one of the large trees, and a couple of foxes in the winter. And then there's a hawk that he was sitting on the fence and he had just finished plucking and eating a bird that he caught. And as far as birds, I think we've seen anywhere between 25 and 30 different species in the yard. And then we get other things. We've got a box turtle that actually comes back and nests in the yard every year. And snakes come through. So it's really nice to have the yard just as a wildlife habitat.